All right, so tonight we're going to talk about photovoltaics or solar PV systems. This is going to be a beginning type class because there's a lot to be learned on the basic level before you move on to do something else. I will say this, I do quite a few of these, and I happen to live in a state where we have a lot of sunshine, so it makes sense. It's a good revenue stream if you guys want to get involved in it. What I'm going to talk to you tonight is going to be an introduction to that, but you really want to get more experience before you go out on your own. We're going to be talking about doing a basic PV inspection on a home, and I'm going to hit some areas that go beyond the basic, just so you understand what they're doing, what they're for. All right. So we're going to talk about PV solar panels for residential homes tonight. This is going to be an introduction only, as it would take 8 hours or more to fully cover all aspects of solar panels. We will cover the reasons and components of PV panels. This presentation applies to the evaluation of panels by home inspectors for storing and generating electricity via photovoltaics. I will give you an overview of how it works, how the system is evaluated, including installation and components. And the reason how I learned all this was I hooked up with a solar panel manufacturer in California who hired me, after training me, to do quality assurance in my state. And I learned a lot by hooking up with them, and they footed the bill. So that was nice. You might do the same thing if you can find somebody who's willing to take you on. Okay. Simply put, sunlight is made up of tiny packets of energy called photons. Every 1 to 9 minutes that the sun shines produces enough energy to supply the earth for a year. Now, 1 to 90 minutes means the sun is not continuously producing photons at a regular rate. It ebbs and flows according to how the sun feels on a particular day. There are sunspots, for example, where the energy rises up high and you might get a 90-minute surge in 1 minute. And there are times when the sun is calmer. It's going to take longer for those photons to reach us and react. PV panels consist of many cells with a positive and negative layer, positives on top, and negatives on the bottom. That's how they're manufactured. When a photon of light hits the panel, an electron is released, which migrates to the bottom of the cell in the array. Now, I just told you in the previous slide that the positive is on top, and it is. What they're talking about here is the electron. That's the movement of the light photon is what's causing the electron to move and cause a flow of electricity to occur. I know it's a little hard to grasp, but that's how it works. The electrons follow the wire that is attached to the cell, which produces a flow of electricity. And the flow of electricity is going to be in DC current, direct current. Combining cells into arrays produces whatever amount of electricity that is needed on a particular house, or what the client is willing to pay for, or what he wants to have operating when there's a brownout or a blackout. Photovoltaics pertaining to the direct conversion of light to electricity. Photovoltaic cell, the smallest semiconductor element within a PV module to perform the immediate conversion of light into electrical energy in the form of, as I said, DC direct current. Also known as a solar cell, the basic building block of a module. So we ended up, can anybody see my purple arrow? Anybody out there see my purple arrow?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So we start out with a solar cell. That's the basic unit of producing electricity from sunlight, combining a bunch of those into a module. Whoops, I'm sorry. combining the cells into a module, combining the modules into panels, and adding panels as you see fit or the client sees fit in order to get the amount of electricity he wants. And all of these terms right here in the circle are all components pertaining to solar arrays. So where does it go? The solar cells and array produce electricity. The inverter converts DC current into AC current. The AC current enters the main service panel and serves some or all of the house. Optionally, storage batteries can store power for nighttime use when the sun doesn't shine or if it's a cloudy day. And optionally, excess power can be used to reverse the meter and sell back to the power company. The sell back to the power company is something the power companies resist tremendously. So it depends on your market area, where you're doing inspections, as to whether or not they're going to allow that to happen or not. There's a different configuration if you sell back power to the power company. A few more components are required, and I'll talk about that tonight. Tilt angle, the angle at which a photovoltaic array is set to face the sun relative to a horizontal position. The tilt angle can be set or adjusted to maximize seasonal or annual energy collection. That's why solar arrays are not always sitting flat on the roof unless the angle of the roof supports that. Pathfinders and irradiance meters. Neither of these instruments are needed or required for doing a typical or basic solar array inspection. They do come in handy for certain measurements. The extent of how you do your inspection on solar, if you decide to do that, decide to get into that kind of business, is going to depend on the details. If you're going to do a basic inspection, you're not going to be able to charge a whole lot. Some, you might get 75, 150 bucks extra. If you go further though, you can charge more. And if you're going to do that, you need these two pieces of equipment in order to function. If a more thorough or specific inspection is called for, then they do play an important part. More information can be found on the internet. Basically, this is an intro for solar. Irradiance meter. This rectangular little piece of equipment runs about 85 to 150 bucks. And what it does is it measures irradiance of the sun hitting the solar panel and gives you a reading out of it. It's the direct, diffuse, and reflected solar radiation that strikes the surface. That's what you're measuring, usually expressed in kilowatt hours per square meter. And if you look at the close-up here, we're dealing with 1,038 kilowatts per square meter, which is pretty damn good, actually, for as solar panels go. Pathfinder. A pathfinder is used to track the angle of travel of the sun. Angle of incidence, the angle that the sun's rays makes with a line perpendicular to the Earth's surface. For example, a surface that directly faces the sun has a solar angle incidence of 0 degrees. If a surface is parallel to the sun, the angle of incidence is 90 degrees. Sunrise striking a horizontal rooftop, for example. And this information can be used to determine the best angle and location for tracking the sun from anywhere from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is your most intense sunshine days. Beyond that, you're still getting some readings, you're still getting some absorption, but it's diminished substantially due to the angle of the sun towards the Earth. That's our Pathfinder. We have to have a compass in there to tell us where north is, because we have to orient our readings. And these maps underneath the globe are designed to fit the geographical areas that you're inspecting in. You wouldn't use this, for example, in South America or the West Coast. You'd have a different map for that. So it's important you know you use the right components. What a Pathfinder is for does two things. The Pathfinder shows any shading that may occur at any time during the year. Shading can be trees, buildings, projections, high-rise buildings, for example. The best time of day for the sun to shine its brightest is what that instrument tells you. Solar panels are decisive in that the sun's rays are bouncing off the array, generating voltage, or the rays are shaded and no voltage is being generated. These photovoltaic cells have to be exposed to sunlight at all times in order for electricity to be generated. Any kind of shading, clouds, trees, anything like that, and they're going to shut down because it's the photons that keep them going. And if photons can't reach where it needs to go, then the electricity will not be generated. Another way of visualizing this, if the sun is directly overhead, like noon, for example, you may say the angle is 0 degrees, the angle of incidence. It is also when we receive the strongest radiation, like raindrops falling on the ground, they fall at a 90-degree angle. Usually at noon, but it can be expanded from about 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. Before or after that, your generation of electricity is going to be slowed down quite a bit. On the other hand, when the sun is setting, the angle of incidence is about 90 degrees. We receive the least amount of radiation because it is being absorbed in the atmosphere and deflecting off the Earth's surface. Here's a good example of the sun's setting, and you can see where the angle of incidence is 0 degrees, and the amount of photons getting into the panels is minimal, if at all. We have clear skies and we have partly cloudy skies. That's going to be true anywhere in the world. And you would think that clear skies offer the most intensity of sun's photons hitting the panels, when actually that's not the case. You get a much higher intensity when it's partly cloudy. And nobody can explain why, but they have measured the results and it's proven to be true. Apparently, when there's a partly cloudy sky, the clouds tend to focus the intensity of the sunlight more than just having a clear sky. So the absorption rate is going to be much greater on your panels. I know it sounds weird, but it works. Here's a tile roof, and they're getting ready to install some solar panels on it. And you can see where they've put their brackets in and installed them in such a way that they shouldn't leak because they're tucked underneath the row of roofing above them. And they're spacing them according to what size panels they're going to use. That's all been predetermined. Like any component that has potential to carry electricity, they have to be bonded. And you can see right here on the left, the racks right here are butted together, and they've put a bond on each side of them in case they might separate. That bonding jumper causes the continuity of electricity to occur. That's true in every row of rack. And then they've got to bond them vertically as well, because they're separated from each other. So the potential for electricity, for example, on this rack might not be as much as it is on this rack, causing a differential to occur, and that's what bonding prevents. There's our bonding wire underneath, tightly tacked in place so it doesn't touch the roof. There should never, ever, ever be any wiring in connection with the roof, because the roof gets hot and the wires are going to move around when it gets windy and they're going to abrade. So they need to be tucked away. That's a basic inspection technique that you can do just by using your eyes. Find the end of the panels and look underneath them. Now, you all recognize that symbol right there? That's a grounding symbol, but that's a bonding wire. So they either put the wrong wire here or they've got the wrong symbol on there. And based on the two things, I would say the wire's wrong. So they've taken a bonding wire and put it in a ground clip, and that's incorrect. Getting racks up on a shingle roof instead of a tile roof, they've tucked their support underneath the shingle above it like they should. And then they're going to attach the rack to it, to the clip, and bolt it together. Takes it off the roof. You don't want these panels sitting directly on the roof, even when the angle of incidence is perfect, because of the heat that's generated. Not only is the roof generating heat, but the solar panels are generating heat as well. And it's one of the things you want to check when you're doing a basic inspection. Bonding clips. This here is to cause the panels to be secured to the racks, but they have to be bonded to each other. And that doesn't work here because that's not what it's designed for. So they put a bonding clip in, and you can see that by spotting between the panels. There should be a minimum of 4 bonding clips per panel. Here we're seeing one on one panel and one on another. There should be 3 more someplace around here and 3 more someplace around here. That causes continuity to occur. Another example. Now here, they got a manufactured clip. They're calling a grounding clip, which is not correct because that's a bonding clip. And oftentimes you'll see that happen because for some reason it's difficult for people to understand the definition of grounding and bonding. I know all you guys do up there because you've been looking at it forever, but a lot of people don't understand it. And that goes for solar panel installers. Bonding clip, missing clip, because there should be 4 per panel. And we have wires laying on the ground, laying on the roof.
So Mike, you're talking about the importance of bonding, and I can't agree with you more. What about, I mean, bonding, I don't know what I said, but you're talking about bonding. What about grounding? Do we need grounding?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of that?
Are we looking for grounding also? In addition to bonding, should it be grounded? Should the system be grounded?
Oh, yeah, sure. And as a matter of fact, you kind of jumped ahead a little bit. I'll be getting to that in a minute.
Okay, good.
You have to have both. You have to have bonding and grounding, yes. And there we go. That's a grounding wire and a grounding clip. Now, you don't have to have this on the panel because it's already bonded. And then panel is connected to the metal rack here. So by putting this grounding clip here, you've actually accomplished the same thing. You've caused the continuity of the electricity to follow where it needs to and end up down this wire and back towards where it terminates. You should look for these symbols if they exist. That's an earthing symbol or a grounding symbol. And that's what we saw in that previous slide. This is a bonding symbol, easily identified. So, because sometimes they're misidentified or they're not properly identified. Here we go. We've got the racks in. We got some panels being installed and secured, hopefully. Pretty steep roof.
So Mike,
more of the same. Yeah.
We get too far away from there. So that ground wire is what? It's going to a ground stake, or where's that going?
The ground wire.
Yeah.
It's going back to the main service panel, where all ground wires have to terminate.
It terminates in the panel.
It's in the panel, but if it's got a PV panel, which they're coming out with some new stuff on the market in the last 10 years, they've started incorporating PV panels to act as main service panels. There's still a main service panel on the building, but there's an additional PV panel, which is, you could call a main service panel for the PV. And if that's the case, that ground wire would go to that panel. I'll show you some examples.
All right, good.
Junction box. Now you noticed here they've got junction boxes underneath the panels. That's just the way the manufacturer. Let me tell you something about solar panel manufacturers. They all have a distinct way of manufacturing their products. They always want you to use their stuff and you can't interchange them with somebody else's stuff. And if you've seen any of the commercials, they're trying real hard to sell people on this stuff, and it's a good thing, but they're trying real, they're like used car salesmen. They're trying to sell you on these systems, telling you all the good stuff. But when you start doing this, and this particular manufacturer requires it, once they put these panels in place, they can't be reached anymore. You'd have to take the whole panel off in order to get back to it. Whereas in this case, with this company, they've extended that out beyond the panel. So if you need to get in there for any reason, you don't have to take the panels down. It's accessible. And by the way, if you go beyond a basic solar panel inspection, one of the steps is to open that up and take a look at what's going on. So anyway, they have to have them. Sometimes they're tucked under the last panel, but still you can't reach it without taking the panel out. Manufacturers want you to use their products. These are watertight, supposedly. They're proper connections because the manufacturer asked for them, required you to get used. They're properly sealed. There's a lot of high voltage in here, so be careful what you touch. Here's another example of a different manufacturer where they're not using those black connections. They're just using wire nuts, but these don't twist on, they push on, so they can't take them off. In this particular company, by the way, they don't only want you to use their products like this, but they want you to point the ends of the wires towards the ridge, which is the up direction. So any water getting into the box, there's a slight chance that water won't get into these connections.
So,
Here's another example.
Mike, we still have some questions about the grounding and bonding. Maybe let's see if we can clean that up, if you don't mind. So when you said you're going to terminate it in the panel, we're taking direct current, a direct current system to the alternating current distribution.
No, if it's in the main service panel, you're going to have alternating current because the inverter converts DC current into AC current.
Right.
So it'll terminate in that panel.
In the
Actually, now that I think of it, it'll terminate in both, either panel, whether it's PV panel or main service panel, it'll terminate in both because it's already beyond the inverter.
well, we're talking about grounding the panels and the brackets to support the panels, right? That ground conductor goes to the PV panel ground bus, right?
It'll either go through the PV panel or it'll go through the main service panel if they don't have a PV panel.
And that's okay if you're going from, I guess there is no current on that ground, so it doesn't really matter, right?
No, it doesn't, because once it's at the final, it's at its final destination, it's served its purpose. I mean, that's what it's there for. And its final destination is always going to be whatever the panel is just prior to the meter. That makes sense?
Nick, are you getting your question answered?
I don't know. I don't understand what you just said, Mike.
Okay.
Can you explain that maybe in better detail?
You've got all the components on the roof bonded because everything's metallic, and you want to have the potential of electricity on anything that can carry electricity to be equal. That's the whole point. That's the whole purpose of bonding. Okay, you can't have the high rack with one potential of electricity. It's for its ability to carry one kind of one. I'm losing. If you have a high rack on the roof and it's not bonded, and electricity gets on that for some reason, lightning strike, for example, it has no place to go because there's no wire connecting that rack on the high end down to the other racks and to the other racks until it gets to where the rack is going to be grounded as well as bonded. Did that help any? I don't know if I helped you any.
Well, I don't know. I feel that, and maybe I'm not as educated on the solar panels, but I feel that's direct current, and that goes into an inverter that then goes into our panel, correct?
Right.
And I, so I feel that any electrician that works on solar has to be familiar with direct current and also alternating current.
Well, yeah, that's what the inverter is. It takes direct current and converts it to
I, I
alternating current.
understand that, but I feel like some of these electricians maybe don't understand that you know that we're dealing with two types of current.
Yeah, and it's not that electricians don't understand it. It's a very difficult concept to absorb in your brain. You got to think about it. When these manufacturers, when a manufacturer sells you a solar system, they have their own electricians come in. They know what they're doing. Now, most electricians should be able to understand this stuff, and a lot of them do. But you see a lot of mistakes in the field for the opposite reason because they don't understand what they're doing.
I agree with that, and we're here up in the Washington D.C. area, and it's it you know I'm 65. I've been building forever, but the solar is kind of new, and sometimes I don't understand everything that's going on, but I understand that there is an inverter and it goes into the alternating current. I
Hmm.
just was concerned of if we're bonding and then we're grounding, are we grounding that to our main electrical distribution panel?
Yes.
Okay. That's my question. That's all.
Okay. I'm glad to help.
And thank you for your expertise on this.
I won't charge you for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh, all right. So the junction box, regardless where it is, has to be sealed. There's a gasket underneath this cover. The wires going into the junction box have to be sealed, and they cannot be touching the roof. You see this all the time. They don't pay attention to details. Wires laying on the roof. A wind gets in there, or a breeze, those wires are going to start moving back and forth. They're going to get abraded. They're going to be shorts. It's just sloppy workmanship. Laying on the roof. There's a lot of heat generated underneath these panels by the panels themselves. And there's a lot of heat generated on the roof because it's outdoors and in direct sunlight or indirect sunlight. So that's why these wires are not designed to handle that kind of heat. Here's a good job. You stand at the end of the panel, wherever it terminates or starts, and you look underneath there. No wires. They did a good job. They got them all strapped in place here on the racks. Here, they're checking to make sure the panels are secured. These little guppies right here are what's holding the panels down onto the racks. And these have to be torqued, by the way. I've yet to see anybody do that, but they're supposed to be torqued according to the manufacturer to a certain foot pound. But my home inspector's job is not going to be carrying around a torque wrench. We're just going to go up there, see if we can shake them a little bit, or if they wiggle at all, and that would indicate that they're not properly secured. And it's about as far as we go. Again, I was talking about heat. One of the basic things inspector would do is try to measure the heat being generated underneath this panel. Should be anywhere from 85 to 95, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower, depending on whether it's cloudy or not. If it's way high, something's going on. And I would call for a solar contractor to come out and take a look at it. Now we're in the indoor part. We have our main service panel in the garage. We have our PV inverter, and we have our remote inverter readout. Why they would put a readout adjacent to the inverter, which has a readout on it already, is beyond me. It's designed to be put at a remote location, but whatever. I guess the homeowner wanted it there, and that's where they put it. Conduit going from the panels on the roof to the inverter in the garage, or they can be mounted outside, but all manufacturers recommend they not be put in direct sunlight because they do produce a lot of heat. So if they're going to have them outside, you want to see whether they're exposed to sunlight at the location or not. The vast majority, however, are going to be indoors, usually in a garage. DC isolation switch. These are mandatory by code, by solar code. You have to have an on and off switch in order to disconnect this piece of equipment right here. Every manufacturer has its own design criteria.
Hey,
So
Mike,
you're gonna,
just a minute, what, you're disconnecting what from what? You're disconnecting the solar panels from the PV panel or the PV panel from the distribution panel? What is that switch doing?
you talk about this,
Yeah, what is it disconnecting?
the disconnect shuts this off.
Disconnects the panel from the inverter.
It
It disconnects the whole system from the electrical system of the house.
can disconnect the panels from the inverter. It disconnects the inverter from the distribution panel. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
it does. Yeah.
Thank you.
Large storage capacity. If you open these up, which doing a basic inspection, I would not recommend because it's pretty complicated in here. But if you want to, I'll cover a little bit. Storage capacity, you want to be careful. There's a lot of electricity in here, and direct current is a lot more dangerous than alternating current is. We have a central readout. This is accessible to almost everyone, and it's good for you to look at them to see how they operate, and I'll show you what they all mean. We have our AC side and our DC side. The DC side is direct current coming in from the panels, and it's being converted via all this junk in here to alternating current and our shutoff. By the way, all this stuff has to be labeled. The on and off switch has to be labeled. The inverter has to be labeled. Everything has to be labeled. That's a code requirement. Different designs of the inverter when you open them up. AC, DC side, terminals rather. The readout. Every inverter is going to have a readout. And it's going to tell you stuff if you know how to interpret it. The E today is 3.21 kilowatts per hour. That's what it's producing. And whatever mode they've got it set at. I'll explain what all these are in a minute. Here we have PAC AC, a PAC, AC power produced, and VPC is voltage power produced. And down here we got total energy produced. So far it's 15.8 kilowatts per hour, and total hours of operation 49 hours. It's been operating for that. E today, the amount of energy or voltage produced today in kilowatt hours. Mode displays the current operating mode. PAC, the amount of AC current produced by the PV array converted. VPV, the amount of DC current produced by the PV array. E total, the total amount of energy or voltage produced to date. And H total, the total time the inverter has been running. We have to have a AC disconnect and we have to have a DC disconnect. Now, the DC disconnect isn't always mandatory in some locales. So you have to know what's acceptable in your market area. but almost everywhere else they're going to be. I know in my area where I inspect, they're required. And they have to be labeled. Labeled. Unless you're dealing with an emergency, I would not recommend you turn this off. That goes beyond the scope of doing a basic.
The labels also have to be permanent. They can't be those right-on ones. They have to be engraved.
I'm sorry, you're coming in really low. Can you speak up? Hello?
I think that was just background noise.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. The labels have to be engraved. They can't be right-ons.
Yeah. Here we've got a disconnect for AC, disconnect for DC. I'm not sure which is which in this picture, but you notice they're all in conduit. It's a requirement. They can't have exposed wires. Here's a pretty typical setup. We have our main meter panel. It's a split panel. I hate these things. I really appreciate having a panel that's separate from the meter. It's a 200 amp main service panel. We have an AC disconnect. We have a dedicated PVC meter in case you have the ability to sell electricity back to the grid. Like I said, some municipalities, some power companies won't accept that. They won't allow you to do that. Others might. They really don't want you to. They fight it whenever they can. We have our inverter with the inverter readout here. You scroll through these, by the way. That's how you determine. That's why you're able to see what you're reading. And we have our DC disconnect. Nicely done. It's a good job. The AC disconnect switch disconnects the output from the inverter and isolates the inverter from the building wiring and utility service. In other words, it isolates it from the main service panel. The DC disconnect switch, although not always required, is important as it disconnects the DC source from the AC electrical system.
So Mike, Larry's asking the same question I was wondering 2 slides back. Where's the disconnect in that photo? You had all that equipment showing, but where was that disconnect switch? Remember that switch that we were talking about a minute ago?
The DC disconnect has a switch right there.
Right there.
And the AC disconnect, I can't see what's in
The
there.
AC disconnect should be to the right of the meter.
It is. It's right there.
Okay, that's it. It's right there. It's
Yeah.
in the box.
But I think what Hall is asking is, how do you shut it on and off? I can't see in this opening right here, but it looks like it's some kind of,
There's a door on the bottom of that panel that has a main disconnect on it.
okay.
What my
Yeah.
question was, to Hollis or to the group was before you showed a picture of an on-off switch and you were talking about it, you were calling it an on-off switch. And I was wondering where that fit into this whole picture.
Where it fit in?
Yeah. In other words, is that something different than one of these switches we just looked at? Or is that another name for one of these switches?
Oh, no, that's
inside the inverter.
That's inside the inverter because it was outside of the inverter on that other picture.
The cut case was off.
It's kind of like the service switch beside your air conditioning handler, like down in the basement, where you can cut the power on and off to it.
All right, guys, I have made the mistake of
you're talking about this.
Nope.
Guys, I made the mistake of asking Nick to chime in a few minutes ago. So we've now broken our rule and we're going to end up in a mass confusion with everybody trying to join in. So the question is, Larry, Sarah was wanting to know, and I was asking myself the same question. Mike, if you recall, earlier in your presentation, you showed a shut-off switch, and I'm looking for a similar switch in this picture, and I don't see it. It was farther back than that, even farther back than that.
I'm trying to go back to the, you're talking about the on and off switch.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah,
it's
we're-
different, why it's different from the pull handle. Yeah. Well, the on and off switch just disconnects the array on the roof from flowing any further. Okay,
So it wouldn't be in this picture that you're showing now, this one here.
and this disconnect does the same thing. It prevents electricity, DC electricity, from going to the inverter. So it separates the array up on the roof from everything on this wall here. That's the
Okay.
difference.
All right, thanks. Go ahead, carry on.
Conduit has to be secured, properly supported, which in this case is not. It's going to flap around in the wind. If you can't get a right angle or a proper angle on your roof, so you can also install panels anywhere you want, really. And here they've made a rack for it, facing south, facing the sun. Here they've got them in the backyard because they needed more room. Maybe there was not the angle of the roof was not quite adequate for what they needed. Didn't face in the right direction. Might have been a gable end roof, for example, in the wrong direction. So they put them someplace else. Here they're in the backyard and they actually auto track the movement of the sun as it goes across the sky. You see the shadow under here? It's doing a pretty good job. That sun's right there. And as it goes from east to west, these panel faces are going to follow that curve. So it's always getting maximum input. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on batteries. They're everywhere. They're disgusting and dirty, but it's one of the few ways you can get to have electricity at night when there's no sunlight. I don't even look at these things unless I see something really out of place, like spilled acid or something. The newer versions of look like this. These are battery modules, and you can add on to them. This is our main control for the batteries. They got clips right here where you can open it up, and they're going to be breakers in there. They've actually created, in the last 10 years, they've actually created a panel with PV breakers that look like regular breakers, except they're specific to the PV system. So you can shut the system off going directly to this panel and still have your main service panel operating. So you can add modules on, and they have readouts on them to tell you how well they're doing. This is the control panel for these two with our disconnects. This is inside the PV panel where the batteries are, just to the left of the batteries. And they've got disconnects they can use to shut off specific areas of your system without shutting the whole thing off. I think it's more complicated than it needs to be. People living in the house are not going to understand any of this. So I'm not sure it's a good thing, but the manufacturers are going this route. Tesla's a big company that makes these things. This is interesting. You need a screwdriver to operate this, which is kind of weird. When it's in the open position, right now it's in the closed position, but and you click it a half inch to the right and it opens the circuit, causing the electricity not to flow anymore. Why you need a tool to do that? I guess they're trying to dissuade people from actually operating this thing. Not sure why. Solar panels for specific things. These are for fans in the attic to keep it cooler. Solar tubes are pretty popular. They allow sunlight to get in without causing a lot of heat penetrating through because of the angles they've got in there. A lot of new houses I see today, almost all of them now, are going with solar tubes. Don't see a lot of skylights anymore. Solar plywood reduces the heat generated penetrating through the roof into the attic. With this kind of equipment, you can lower your attic temperature in July to under 100 degrees, probably under 90 degrees. Solar arrays are the big thing of the future. They're here. You see them everywhere. Massive solar farms. A lot of maintenance involved. This is new stuff too. I know we're not supposed to walk on tile roofs, but occasionally I have the opportunity to do it for some reason. There's no way you can do it on these things.
I wouldn't even think about it. Yeah, you weren't here, Mike, last month. We had a representative from GAF Energy, the shingle manufacturers.
Yeah.
They've got a new solar shingle product that we were looking at. I mentioned it to you on the phone the other day.
I bet you they had some interesting stuff to say.
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Okay, well, we got a couple questions here about energy efficiency and life expectancies of the panels.
Life expectancy is, they claim, the salesman claimed 25 years. Usually around 18, 20 years, you start to see a lot of wear and tear in these things because they're outdoors that whole time, just like on a roof.
Mhm.
And the efficiency drops, and some cells stop working, although they never know that. They'll notice it in the readout because it'll be lower than normal. And as far as I'm sorry, Hollis, what was the first question?
Well, it was about efficiency. You talk about life.
Efficiency. They're about 20% efficient. They're not really efficient. They don't sell you that. When they're trying to sell you the equipment, they don't tell you that. But the fact is, it's free. It's free energy, and that's what attracts people. We just had two real serious hurricanes here back in October, and the power was out for about 7 or 8 days. And the folks that had solar panels were probably laughing at us.
Yeah. So there are a number of questions coming up about the relationship between these panels and the roofing beneath it. Let's talk about should you replace the shingles before you put the panels on, because you don't want to have to replace the roof with the panels in the way. And what happens if you have hail damage, for instance, or storm damage, even on a new roof? What is that going to do to the cost of the roofing replacement? Can you address that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you got shingles, solar shingles or solar panels, and you got a roof that needs to be replaced. I think twice about getting a solar system if I had any kind of age on my roof whatsoever, because they approximately equal the same life age. A shingle roof, for example, is good for about 18, 20 years in my market area anyway. And the insurance company disagrees with that, by the way. That's a whole different ballgame. So if you're going to have a brand new roof put on and you decide you want to go solar, that's the time to do it. Now, 20 years down the road, when it comes time to replace the roof, that's all going to be taken off. It's going to be expensive. Any other questions?
Yeah, at least in my region.
We have a general question about about maintenance. What does it cost to just keep one of the things alive?
When the panels have been up on the roof for a period of time, 2, 3, 5 years, they collect debris and dust on them, and that lowers their efficiency. Now, in the old panels, the old days, I'm talking 15, 20 years ago, if you had one cell go bad or get covered up, then the whole array, the whole panel didn't work. But they've fixed that. They've addressed that in the last 10 years, where if you lose a row of cells on the bottom of the panel, for example, it stops it so that the rest of the panel can still operate. And that's a good thing. Yeah. But up north, in the DC area, for example, in Virginia, you've got snow in the wintertime. You put snow on the panels, they're not generating anything. Somebody's going to go up there and sweep them off.
So what about installation cost and the payback period? I mean, how long does it take for one of these things to pay for itself?
They figure in about 20 years of payments should cover the cost of installation. Now, if you're in a state where they offer rebates, like in Florida, the state offers rebates for uh, the installation and the equipment. I think they're up to about 25 or 30% right now. You get back, but it's not a lump payment. You get that over a period of time.
So if I'm doing the math, and it's pretty easy math, you're telling me that, see if I'm interpreting this correctly, that it's about a break even, the amount of money that you save in energy costs is equal to the amount of money that it costs you to install it.
Right.
By the time you maintain it, you may actually be losing money.
I'll give you a good example. The house I live in, I pay less than $100 in electricity a month. So it doesn't do me any good to invest $25,000 in a solar system just so I can get some free electricity when it's only cost me $1,200 for the whole year. And that's because I've highly insulated my house. I got R30 in the attic. I've got a light colored roof, and we get pretty hot down here. We're over 100 degrees most of the summer. So it's a matter of economics, you know. Are you going to get a good return on your investment or not? And you need to determine that on each individual basis.
So what about removal and disposal? I mean, at the end of life, I mean, you got a big bunch of junk on your roof. What do you do now?
Well, you go up there with a long hose. And if you've got snow, if you're in the snow area, you go up with a broom and you sweep them down. Of course, it snows the next day, so you defeated your purpose.
But at the end of life, if these things have a 20-year design life, I mean, at the end of life, 20, 25 years in the future, where do you dispose of them?
Yeah, quite honestly, and this is just my opinion. I mean, I'm not against solar. I think it's basically a good thing, but it's very complicated, and there's a lot of things to consider, which when they're selling you a system, they don't tell you about, not unless you ask them directly. And a lot of people don't understand how these things work. Try getting a conversation about bonding, for example.
So is this a hazardous material? I mean, you have to go through all that special permitting and whatnot?
My opinion is, if you're willing to wait, if you're not using a lot of electricity, you can afford to pay the bill every month, wait another 10, 15 years, because the evolution of solar panels is going to increase dramatically. They've already come a long ways in the last 10 or 15 years, and they will come even further in the next 10 or 15 years.
So
And by the way, solar
ahead.
systems, when you're selling your house, solar systems are not a big draw.
Yeah,
People would rather have a swimming pool.
it depends on where you are, I guess, which leads us to our next question. So obviously these things are more effective in different places. Is there a specific place we can look? A map, for instance, that would tell us, where you get the most bang for your buck if you install these things or don't?
More information, you mean?
Yeah.
Everything's on the internet.
I mean, there'll be a heat map that says, it's in the red areas, you save a lot, in the green areas, you don't save very much. It's probably not worth your while. Are you familiar with a map like that?
No, I can't say I have.
But the technology is evolving. I did an inspection a number of years ago where a single guy, no children, no spouse, small house, one electric appliance in his house. So he's got lighting and a water heater, but he didn't hook the solar panels to the panel. It was only to the water heater. He didn't pay $40,000 on electricity to his water heater.
Wow,
And I asked him why.
that's crazy.
Why did you do that?
Now, if we had a longer time, I would get into solar for swimming pools and solar for water heaters, because there's some pretty good stuff going on with that could save you a lot of money. But we can't do that in an hour.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I'm just going to just finish that, because when I asked him why, he gave me that puzzled look, like, what do you mean? I did it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, There are conservative, there are, you know, people who worry about the environment. And I understand that. That's a legitimate feeling. And if you got the money to invest in it, go ahead and invest in it. Apparently they do. It's just
So-
not for everybody.
Yeah. So Doran's making an interesting comment here, which is he's talking about recycling these things, saying that Japan's developed methods for recycling these things, but then he goes on to say that it's not currently economically feasible without government investment. Well, that's true with the installations too, right? Is that these things? It's different. I mean, I guess the way I explain that is that efficiency is expensive. If your reason is to save money, if your reason for implementing an efficiency measure, whatever it is,
Yeah.
if your reason is to save money or to think of it as an investment, you might be better off putting that money in the stock market. If your reason
Well,
is to depending on which way the stock market's going, if your reason is to do the right thing is because you're concerned about the environment, then that's a different question.
yeah.
Is usually expensive.
Well, you know, as home inspectors, we're not judgy people. We do what we're hired to do and give them advice as the best we can and hope they are happy with us.